Marie, and we're here with another episode of Data Talks. Today, I'm here with Christy Hollingshead, Heap Director of Customer Education. Hey, Christy.
Hey.
So today we're going to talk about data governance. So, I've heard this phrase being batted about quite a bit. What does it mean?
Yeah, so data governance is one of those buzzwords, and it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. When we talk about data governance today, really what we're talking about is two things. So who can access your data and how can they manage that data?
So what are the strategies that companies are taking for data democratization?
Yeah, so I think actually data democratization is really interesting because you can take two approaches, this more liberal or this more conservative approach, and there's pros and cons to each, and there isn't necessarily a right answer. A lot of organizations find themselves taking the liberal approach. They make this decision to be data-driven, and they want to get data into the hands of everybody in their organization.
Which makes sense.
Yeah, and it's really great because traditionally, with analytics, IT has really owned that analytics, and in a lot of ways they've created bottlenecks because they really become the barriers to determining who can have access to data and what questions can get answered. So a lot of organizations come in, they make this decision to be strategic with who can access data, and they want to open it up to everyone. They're so excited about the possibilities of having business decisions made on data.
For sure.
But there's a couple of issues that might come along with that. And so while you no longer have bottlenecks with your data, what can happen is that when you have people interacting with data who may not be really familiar with it, a couple of things can happen. So oftentimes people just aren't trained in analytics, both how to sort of write queries and also how to interpret data. And so you run the risk that people are making decisions off data that they really don't understand. And the second part of that is data collection can actually be really sensitive. And if people are creating data and creating that incorrectly or creating incorrect sort of tags or definitions for what these events are, that can mean that the data and the analysis that they're doing is actually wrong. And so you really don't want to run the risk of making a business decision on data that's just flawed. And this can oftentimes be really difficult to fix down the road. Once trust is broken in data, it can be hard to build that back up again in your organization.
That totally makes sense.
So with that in mind, other organizations have taken a more conservative approach. And this is really aligning with that traditional method that I talked about, where you have, either one person or a team of people who kind of really limit the access to that data. So you can allow people to consume data via things like dashboards or reports that this team sort of sends and shares out with others in the organization. But it still means that somebody in your organization needs to take on that ownership. And so it's adding additional responsibilities to their plate. And quite honestly speaking, some organizations, especially those smaller ones, don't have resources to dedicate somebody to managing their data.
Right.
So again, you have this problem of potential bottlenecks and having to prioritize particular people's questions and getting them to answers to that. And for some of these users who have really important questions, the time might pass where they can actually use that data to make impactful choices and changes in their business strategy. So I don't think there's a right or a wrong answer, but you really have to think about the pros and cons of each strategy on democratization. And you can do things with data democratization that allows an organization to kind of shift between those models over time. So for example, you can do things like make internal users have to pass some type of certification or internal exam that shows, hey, they understand what this data is. And if you're also really proactive on the more liberal side about really outlining how users can interact with that data, whether it's how they should name events, how to categorize these events, what to do and where to go for resources and questions, that can also really help mitigate some of the errors that you might be prone to if you have a more liberal strategy.
So let's say I'm an organization and I choose to take this more conservative strategy. What are the qualities of the person or the team that should own this data?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think this person really needs to have two qualities. One of them is not necessarily a personal quality, but it's that they need to be empowered by this organization to enforce the strategies that they're creating. So it doesn't do any good for you to put a low-level individual contributor, for example, in this role, but then not give them the power to really push back and enforce the strategies that they're creating. The second thing is that, in my opinion, I think that this person should actually understand data. And it sounds silly, but we actually see a lot of organizations who put just a regular IT specialist sort of in charge of this data because they're the technical resource of an organization. And while this person has a really great technical skill set, if you don't understand the power of data and also the responsibility that comes along with collecting and managing data, again, you just might not see some of these pitfalls that you could be facing down the road.
With all of these questions and topics that we've been talking about, it sounds like the common theme is just being really intentional and thinking through your data governance and democratization plan.
Absolutely, and I think that is probably the biggest mistake that we see companies making, is really not being mindful and not intentionally creating a data governance strategy. Again, they get so excited about the data and they just want everyone to access it, and it's this huge buzzword of being data-driven and enabling your users to make these decisions. And so they're more excited about getting people access, but again, they're not really thinking about, well, what happens now when we have 100 people, in this environment impacting and interacting data on a daily basis.
For sure, and to your point earlier, if people, if like the data is broken, right, people stop trusting it, and then it kind of, isn't being used.
Exactly. So you can do a lot to mitigate that, but once that trust is broken, it's really hard to build back trust with your employees that they can actually trust that data.
How does data governance work at Heap then?
At data governance in Heap, we know that this is something that's super important to our customers. And so we've actually gone and built quite a few features in our tool that allow people to govern data. So when we talk about data democratization, for example, we have things like permissions. And based on the permission level that a user has, they actually have different access to the data.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, so you can set someone, just as a consumer, for example, who can only consume reports and they can only look at created content, whereas you can give somebody an admin or an analyst access who actually has the ability to capture data, create events, and things like that. Now, from an actual data management standpoint, we also have a lot of great features that are really designed around building trust in your events. So you can do things like verify an event, which adds a green icon to an event, and what that does is it tells users, hey, this event has been checked and verified by somebody who knows what they're talking about, and you can have trust in that. And it also actually locks that event down from being edited. So if this is a really impactful event that people are analyzing a lot, you can lock that down so that it doesn't get changed over time. We also have things like inactivity notifications that will actually alert you when an event has stopped capturing data, so that you're not looking at an event that hasn't actually been capturing data for the last week or month or whatever it may be. So there are a lot of features that we really have in Heap today, and we're constantly thinking about ways that we can make this easier for customers of Heap specifically.
I could totally see how those features will save time and a lot of work on that behalf of people who are using Heap too.
Yeah, that's our hope, and we've heard a lot of good feedback about them. And of course, we'll continue to develop in that area as well.
Okay, great. If people want to find out more about these features or data governance in general, where should they go?
Yeah, so internally, of course, you can always check out our documentation site, which is just docs.heapanalytics.com. We also have some really good resources in our online learning academy. But generally, there's also some larger organizations that share this. So there's actually a Data Governance Institute, for example, and there's a lot of really good online resources that can help you think through some of these choices that you need to make as an organization.
Great. Thank you so much, Christy.
Yeah, my pleasure.